It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large with Warner Lewis. 60 minutes of smart talk radio with interesting guests from all walks of life begins right now. So sit back and enjoy. And now, from the flight deck, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Welcome again, everybody, to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck. And, of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. And this segment, once again, we're going to return to the world of entertainment, and entertainment indeed in the form of musical theater. There's a brand new work called Nothing Like a Dame, Conversations with the Great Women of Musical Theater. It was edited by Eddie Shapiro, and Eddie has a long history and is well acquainted with the entertainment world. His publication, his criticisms and coverage have appeared in Out Magazine, Instinct, Backstage West. He's interviewed a multitude of entertainment luminaries, ranging from Florence Henderson to Nathan Lane to Donna Mills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He also has two previous works called The Actors Encyclopedia of Casting Directors and Queens in the Kingdom, The Ultimate Gay and Lesbian Guide to the Disney Theme Parks. He's the former director of the AIDS Walk of New York, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Eddie, how are you, my friend?
I'm exhausted from listening to you do my resume. I mean, that was exhausting.
Well, you made me tired just thinking of your life. But anyway, you know,
I didn't realize I'd been so busy.
Yeah, you have been, apparently. Nothing Like a Dame, obviously a work of love for you, conversations with the great women of musical theater. And I know much of this is focused on Broadway. But before we get too deep into some of the specifics, let's talk about why, we got a little back. There we go. We're good. Talk to us a little bit about the inspiration for the book.
The inspiration for the book actually came from listening to people like Barbara Cook and Chita Rivera in their Broadway, in their concerts. When they do concerts, they always, sing the music, but then they talk about their time in the golden age of musical theater, working with people like Leonard Bernstein and Rodgers and Hammerstein and that sort of thing. And when they would tell these stories, I would hear these stories and I would think to myself, God, I want to capture these stories while they're there to be captured, because these women are still with us. So I wanted to get more of those stories from more of those women, and that was the inspiration.
We have had interviews with reporters and those that have made sure that we never forgot about the Rainbow Room and some of the other wonderful venues in New York, all related to theater and all related to entertainment. Most of these, the women that you were talking about, appeared on Broadway, but they also appeared around the world as well, did they not?
Well, yes, they all appeared on Broadway because the book is Conversations with the Great Women of Musical Theater. But then, of course, especially now, having a Broadway career, shows aren't. There's if you're somebody like Chita Rivera or Patti LuPone, there's not a musical for you every season. So these women have had to fill out their careers by doing concerts around the world, symphony concerts, and a lot of them, the younger ones are doing a lot of TV and film. Although you say around the world, and several of these women have also performed, of course, on the West End in London and in Australia. They're everywhere. They're working.
What, and again, besides the fact they all had tremendous voices, anything in particular that struck you that these women had in common?
Sure. Oh, yeah, many things. I mean, first of all, you're correct, but they have tremendous voices, but they also, to end up at that level, they also all have tremendous acting range. In fact, several of them, people like Deborah Monk and Audra McDonald and Angela Lansbury, also have done as many straight plays on Broadway as they have musicals. So I think that's what makes them so great as musical theater performers, is they are first and foremost great actors. But stuff that they have in common, and this was the one that surprised me the most in doing these interviews with these 20 women and looking for common themes. The one that really surprised me was insecurity. I always think of myself as somewhat insecure, but you think about people who are really, really accomplished and at the top of their game being much more sort of solid and sure of themselves. But every single one of these women across the board just, talks quite freely about their own insecurities, about wondering or not whether or not there was going to be another show down the line. And, somebody like Audra McDonald, who has 5 Tony Awards to her name, saying things like, I wake up every day not knowing if today's the day they're going to realize I'm a fraud. That was really compelling.
Yeah.
Here's people, at that level still questioning themselves.
Yeah, no question. Those that are in the entertainment world get a tremendous rush, of course, from the audience itself, but have that deep-lying insecurity for sure. And that kind of leads me to the next question, is that these women, again, got tremendous energy thrown back at them from an appreciative audience. And I'm curious, in any of your conversations with them, did they say that their first love was ever anything other than the theater? Did they say, I really liked film more or television more or whatever?
No, absolutely not. Every single one of them said that, theater is their first love, and anything else that they do is to sort of fill out the career. But I think Laura Benanti put it best. She said, TV is my mistress, but theater is my wife.
Okay. Hey, again, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. Got a good one going here. We're talking to Eddie Shapiro, who's put together a fascinating work called Nothing Like a Dame, Conversations with the Great Women of Musical Theater. Eddie, question for you. Go out 25 years from now. Will we be able to do another version of this book? Are there continuing to be great women of musical theater, or is that waning in some way, shape, or form?
Oh, that isn't that, well, God, if only I could prognosticate. They always describe Broadway as the fabulous invalid, but they've been doing it for 50 years. So Broadway manages to hobble along, and I think for as long as Broadway hobbles along, there will be great talent emerging. And if you look at this book, there are some people, some of whom I've mentioned already, people like Elaine Stritch and Carol Channing and Cheetah Rivera and Angela Lansbury, the stalwarts who've been around forever. But the book also features younger talent, some of which is very established, people like Sutton Foster and Kristen Chenoweth and Laura Benanti and Idina Menzel. And there's no reason to believe that those women, who are all in their late 30s or early 40s, 25 years from now, there won't be other women of their ilk who will come along and be just as powerful. And I think, it's funny. As I said, Broadway's often called the fabulous invalid, but it's $1 billion business. People are still coming, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that that's going to change, especially as we get more and more into a world of high tech and watching things on iPads and on our phones and that sort of thing. The power of live theater, I think, only grows. But that's me. Who knows? I don't know. What do you think?
And I agree with you. I think that because of the sterility of the virtual world, to see live theater, it is absolutely mind-expanding for most people if you've never seen live theater like that. It's extraordinary. Yeah. I've got a question for you. You're interviewing. You have interviews and conversations with 20. How easy was that list to make? How cooperative were they? And how tough was it to limit it to 20?
Limiting it to 20 was impossible. There are so many who I think, quote unquote, deserve to be on the list, and so many who I would have loved to have spoken to. But the culling the list down was based on a criteria that I essentially had to set. You had to have a Tony Award and have to have been nominated for at least one other Tony Award or one other major award. You had to have a career in musical theater. So somebody like, for example, Julie Andrews, who did 2 Broadway or 3 Broadway musicals and then left to become famous in films, I didn't really count her because, she had left theater. Or somebody like Glenn Close, who pops in occasionally, but her career was really elsewhere. That didn't count either. It had to be somebody who had a career in musical theater. And the third element was they had to say yes when I asked. And not everybody said yes. But so from that list, that's how I sort of ended up with my 20. But yeah, it was close to impossible to get there because there's so many that I wanted to interview. And in terms of the cooperativeness of that group, shockingly, they were quite cooperative. And I think, to an extent, some of them were a little bit more reticent at first, just sort of like, who is this guy and why should I talk to him? But once I sort of established my credentials and proved that I knew what I was doing, they were very, very not only willing, but really, really generous. I mean, I spent 8, 10 hours with most of these women. They were quite generous with their time and with their candor, and I was really thrilled with their generosity of spirit.
Eddie, sometimes a bad script can be carried well by tremendous talent, and vice versa. Poor talent can be carried by a script. How many of these women, in your opinion, ended up from time to time in as from a writing point of view, a real dog, but because of their tremendous talent, they were able to carry it?
Yeah, every single one of them has done at least one show where you think, oh, God, this isn't the best material, but, they are a great talent that can transcend the material. And it's funny, I did ask that question of several of them, what's it like to be performing in something that's not working and it's not working. And largely, nobody takes a job thinking that it's not good, and none of them at least admit to or say that they took a job just for the money. They all sort of go into them thinking, all right, on paper this looks like it's going to be good, and several of them, there's a somewhat infamous show called Steel Pier that 3 of the women in the book, Karen Ziemba, Deborah Monk, and Kristen Chenoweth, all appeared in, and all of them say, and it was a big flop, and all of them say that show on paper and in the rehearsal room was fantastic, but that as soon as it got on stage with all of the sets and all the costumes, it got lost. And that will happen sometimes. You get, what you think it's going to be and what it ends up being are 2 separate things. But yeah, they've all been stuck in dogs, but they've all had hits too. Sure.
Share with our Lewis at Large listeners, if you would, the era in terms of just the years and the length of time that the 20 women, their careers have covered. And by that I mean going back how far, and are any of them still continuing to perform?
Sure. The book is actually arranged chronologically, not by age, but by when you first started performing on Broadway. So the first person in there is Elaine Stritch, who was performing in the 40s. And Elaine Stritch is now 89 years old, but she still claims, like last week, she claims that she's still hoping to do a production of an Edward Albee play on Broadway in the coming season. And Angela Lansbury, who's 88 years old, is doing Blithe Spirit in London right now. So even the eldest of the women in the book is still at it. Actually, Carol Channing is the eldest. She's 93, but she just did an evening in Town Hall in New York. So they're all still going. And it was great. When I asked Angela Lansbury about that, I said, you seem to just keep doing show after show. And she said, yeah, I thought for a while that I would do one more, but now I realize I love it, and I'll keep doing it for as long as I can. And, I think that's the kind of thing, don't we all hope that we can just keep doing it as long as we can, whatever it is that we love? I mean, certainly I aspire to that when I get to be 88, should I live that long.
Is this group of women, would you say, Eddie, that there is a European counterpart to this, or is this a uniquely American phenomena?
I think that there are some. Well, I did think about the London women at one point, and there are some. But given that musical theater is really America's, and there are other countries, particularly London, who do it as well, but nobody does it like us. And I think because of that, the talent is uniquely American, just like the composing talent. Yes, there are British composers, people like, other than Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's hard to think of, a great British composer, although there are a couple, I guess, Noel Coward. But all of the musical theater greats, they're all American. And I think that's largely true of the talent, too.
You've got a tremendous list here, but let's, you just mentioned Carol Channing. Share with us, if you would, maybe a takeaway that it sticks with you about Carol Channing, a funny story or something maybe about her that maybe the rest of us wouldn't have no clue about, something like that.
Gosh, there are so many because Carol Channing is truly unique. But I think one of my favorite stories that she shared was we spoke about the fact that Carol Channing has never missed a performance, she missed one due to food poisoning in her entire career, but she's never missed. And she's famous for having gone on when she's sick, when she's ailing. She's been on stage on crutches, and she said, I've been on stage with a broken arm. I've been on stage with a fever. She's telling the whole story. She said, I sprained that when I fell off the stage. And I said, you fell off the stage? And she said, yeah, I fell right off. And I said, well, you heard about when Ann Miller fell off the stage. She said, Ann Miller fell off the stage? I said, yeah, she fell off the stage, and they found a 6-inch nail in her wig later that night, but they didn't even know it had gone in there because the wig was so thick. So she burst out laughing. She said, a wig, that's it. Well, I have an Ann Miller story for you. When Ann Miller was in Maine, she took over for Angela Lansbury, and she had her accident. She filled out the insurance papers. Name, Ann Miller. Occupation, star, because obviously she's occupied with being a star. Cause of accident, big yellow prop moon. Now, can you imagine such a thing, big yellow prop moon? These are insurance men. They don't know from big yellow prop moon. But if you see Ann, you must tell her I told you. I said, well, I can't, Carol. She's no longer with us. Well, that's right.
Oh, brother. By the way, good job imitating Carol Channing. Well done, my friend.
Well, thank you. But, you sit with her for enough hours, and it rubs right off.
Yeah, it's pretty infectious. What about Leslie Uggams, well known?
Leslie Uggams is a delightful woman, and she actually, I mentioned before, you asked a question about appearing in Dogs, and I mentioned, ever taking a job for the money, and she said she did it once. She took a production of West Side Story for the money, and she learned from that experience. She said that was Meth Side Story, and never again would she take a job just for the money because it just isn't worth it. But my favorite thing about Leslie Uggams is that she is not, sometimes when people become a star, you worry about what's the public going to think about my next thing. And she's not afraid to be performing all over the country regionally. And I asked the question, I said, you're at a certain level, when you're not getting roles on Broadway, do you think it lessens the perception at all to be performing in Houston or Atlanta or whatever? And she said, I go to those places because I get to perform roles that they were never going to cast me for on Broadway. To play Maria Callas in Masterclass, or to play Dolly in Hello, Dolly.
Right.
I'm not going to get that on Broadway, but I get to do those roles out on the road. So, yeah, absolutely. And I just love the work that much. And that was also really, really inspiring, I thought.
Right. What about Angela Lansbury? Again, known by most Americans, most likely, Eddie, let's face it, from television, at least their first...
Murder, She Wrote, yeah.
Right, whether that's fair or not, but it does not speak to the tremendous career she's had on the stage.
No. I mean, the woman has 4 Tony Awards. 5. Wait, is it 4 or 5? It's 5. Yeah, she's got 5 Tony Awards now. So she's had a tremendous career on the stage. But what was most interesting to me about Angela Lansbury, first of all, Angela Lansbury was exactly what you would expect her to be or want her to be. I mean, a total class act, so gracious, so sweet. But she didn't start her career. Most of these women who are in musical theater grew up wanting to be in musical theater, tap dancing at the age of 6 or whatever. Angela Lansbury had no aspirations to be in musical theater initially. She was an actress in London first and then in Hollywood. And she only started on Broadway in her first Broadway musical. She was almost 40 years old. And she said to me that, thank God, that opportunity came about because Hollywood, she wasn't really making it, she said, in Hollywood. And I said, you weren't making it in Hollywood. You had, at that point, 3 Oscar nominations under your belt. How could you say that you weren't making it? And she said, well, I wasn't being understood by Hollywood in the way that I wanted to be understood. And again, it was whether or not, it's perception or reality, it's still interesting that for her, even though with 3 Oscar nominations, her career wasn't what she wanted it to be until she got to Broadway. And I found that fascinating.
Well, again, if you just joined us, we're talking to Eddie Shapiro. He is a longtime entertainment reporter and critic. We're talking specifically about a new work he's got out called Nothing Like a Dame, Conversations with the Great Women of Musical Theater. It is an extraordinary collection of conversations with 20 extraordinary American actresses and entertainers, ranging again from Angela Lansbury, Leslie Uggams, Judy Kay, Betty Buckley, on and on and on and on and on. Eddie, boy, you've done this one for the women. It begs the question, what about the leading men?
Yeah, I was actually. So I'm standing right now on Broadway and 50th Street on my way home to get some of the solicitation letters out to the men. I've already made my list. So yeah, it's coming. Just sit tight.
Okay, indeed. What about how close? And again, I know they range in age, but what these women do have in common is extraordinary talent. They've been in Broadway musicals, some good, some not so good. How well do they know one another? What kind of a sorority is it?
It's an absolute sorority, and it's lovely to see. And that actually was one of the things that I was really excited to capture in the book. The opportunity to ask them about each other and have them comment on each other. But then, so each chapter stands alone, of course. It's each woman's own story. But then there are these through lines, thematic through lines, and in many cases they've worked with each other. They've been in shows together. They're each other's inspiration and also each other's peer. So when the book launched just a couple of weeks ago in New York, 5 of the women were there, and then 2 weeks later I did a Barnes & Noble reading in New York, and 5 of the women were there. And just seeing them interact together, it's like old home week. It is absolutely a sorority because they've all, been in the same room together so many times, be it on stage together or doing benefits or even just at the Tony Awards, and they all understand each other's lives in ways that you and I can't because we don't live them, but they all walk in the same footsteps. It's really interesting watching them interact.
Anything we talked to you about some takeaways, but anything that you learned here, or as you look back on this group of 20 women, was there any big surprise to you overall? Did you learn something that you thought, wow, after doing this, I realize X, Y, Z? Anything in particular?
There's lots, actually. I already mentioned the insecurity thing and recognizing that even at the top of your game, you're still insecure. That was a big surprise to me. But another one that caught me off guard was how much I personally learned from literally every one of them. They all had really inspiring life lessons to impart, and I felt very, very grateful to be there to take it in. I mean, one of my favorites was Chita Rivera. In talking to her, Chita Rivera is now 81 years old and is, of course, known as a great dancer. And I think there are many people who still go to see Chita Rivera, and you expect a certain level of dance movement. And, of course, she's an 81-year-old woman, which isn't to say that she doesn't still kick up her legs or doesn't still move phenomenally well, but it's not like, it was 50 years ago. And I asked her that. I said, knowing that people have an expectation and that, it's not exactly what you're offering now, how does that resonate for you? And she said, I could spend a lot of time thinking about the things that I can't do anymore, or I could spend my time focusing on all of the things I can. And let me tell you, I can still do a whole lot. I thought that's so appropriate for all of us to think about all the time. Those kinds of life lessons were a true inspiration, and I feel really, as you mentioned, grateful to have been in the room and sort of gotten that wisdom handed down to me.
Well, the work is called, again, Nothing Like a Dame, Conversations with the Great Women of Musical Theater. The author, Eddie Shapiro, a longtime observer, reporter, and critic of theater and entertainment world in general. It is published by Oxford Press. Eddie, how can people find out more about the work that you do and also get a copy of the book?
Well, the book is available wherever books are sold, so it's Amazon, it's Barnes & Noble. It is also available through Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. And if you buy a copy through Broadway Cares, not only does the money go to that great charity, but there's also a bonus chapter available that you can only get through Broadway Cares. And to find out more about events with the book or just their quotes from the book, there's a Facebook page, and Nothing Like a Dame has its own Facebook page, and daily I'm putting up little snippets from the book, and people are interacting about it, so Nothing Like a Dame on Facebook.
We do appreciate your time. Thanks so much, and we'll be looking forward to the great leading men, maybe one day, from musical theater, and would love to have you back on again.
Thank you so much. It's great talking to you. You asked good questions.
Well, thank you very much. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.